All right, so I'm here with Mark Rolls this morning. Mark is the Vice President of Commercial Development with Magellan, and we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. So, in class, I've mentioned to you that we've talked about how leadership has been defined as influence, essentially.
Right.
So, first question I want to ask, and let you take it where you want to. What is leadership to you?
Right. I would probably agree with the definition that that you presented, but I would add one aspect to that. Really, it's influencing and developing individuals and groups to accomplish a central goal or achieving a common goal.
Right.
The part about developing is important because if you're not developing people
Mm-hmm.
to grow and become leaders, then basically their upside is limited.
Right.
And so my view is that yes, you're influencing groups and individuals,
Mm-hmm.
but you're also developing them
Right.
into great leaders, so that they can kind of take the reins. And of course, the more influence you can have in an organization through those other leaders, the more influence you can have on the business.
Right. So, kind of building on that idea of development, for you, was there a certain person or an instance or a time that impacted you, essentially, that led to the start of your development as a leader?
Sure. I can give several examples. First, it doesn't all come from one place.
Right.
It comes from a multitude of areas, especially when you get into your career. Most individuals start somewhere low in an organization,
Right.
and they build their way up, and you don't actually get into leadership until maybe your second or third job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, my third job, I was 25 years old, and I was plunged into an environment where I had 30 direct reports, and it was a blue-collar type environment, kind of a Teamsters type environment. And so it was extremely challenging, and so I was kind of thrown in before being greatly prepared,
Mm-hmm.
but it created an environment where I had to get prepared, and I had to do self-study,
Right.
and I really cut my teeth in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you grow in an organization and get more and more leadership responsibility, you do less and less of the tactical execution and management, and you do more leadership. And so today, in my current role, I would say that about 80% of my time is just leading people, developing and leading people, and putting the right people in the right roles to accomplish the right task.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had experiences with very poor leaders, especially early in my career, and being on the subordinate side of that
Right.
was a very important experience for me in developing my own skills, because I really learned on what not to do.
Perspective.
And, absolutely. And those I still remember very vividly some of the traits that those leaders had that were poor. And I remember the feeling I had,
Yeah.
and the lack of willingness to stay motivated
Right.
to do anything. And then I contrast that with some great leaders that I've
Mm-hmm.
worked for and with, and other great leaders outside of my business that I study. Abraham Lincoln, for example, one of the greatest leaders of all time in our country, led our country through some of the most difficult
Mm-hmm.
trials we ever had, and did it with grace and humility. And pretty much everyone, if you talk about Abraham Lincoln and read his books, he's just greatly respected as a leader.
Wow.
And so I would throw people like that out there that I've read up on and studied.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of self-study.
So you've had people that might have mentored you, but also you've read and conceptualized ideas from other people who not necessarily did you meet with, but you've still been able to learn quite a bit from.
Yes, there's one very important thing you need to remember. Your learning starts when you're done with college. When you get into your career, that's where the majority of your knowledge will come from. You're learning the basics in college, the theory, the fundamentals, the technical side of business or whatever you're studying. once you get into your career, that's really where you learn this stuff. And leadership, although I do agree that some of the traits are natural for people, I do believe a lot of it is learned as well. And as long as you're willing to continue to self-study, and I'm always learning, I'm always reading, I'm studying people like Abraham Lincoln and other great leaders, and then leaders in my business too,
right?
That are very influential. I'm constantly studying that stuff and trying to develop what I want to be as a leader.
Yeah. So you kind of hit on what my next question was going to be, as far as the idea of leadership. To some people, is a natural, inherent quality that you have.
Right.
For others, they believe not necessarily everybody's born a leader, but it can be a learned skill. Do you think there's a mesh between those, or do you think there's a distinct, in your mind, way that leaders are born or maybe learn?
I don't believe that leaders are just born and all of a sudden they're plunged into a situation where they're a great leader. I believe that some inherent traits have to exist, though, for a great leader to learn, or a leader to learn how to be a great leader.
Right.
Okay, so it's a mesh, in my opinion. As an example, when I was very young, in high school, for example, I was always captain of athletic teams because it wasn't always because I was the best player. It was because I just showed inherent leadership skills. I naturally brought people to a position where they wanted to follow me, and so some of it is learned, but I didn't have a clue on what it took to lead an organization at the time. Right. It was through a process of learning and seeing the bad and the really good sides of leadership, and then doing self-study where I think I was able to develop more of my leadership skills. So I do believe it's a mesh of both.
Gotcha.
For example, I think some people cannot become a great leader unless they have certain traits.
Right.
I think that you have to be willing to work hard. You have to be willing to do things that you're asking your team or your subordinates to do. You have to be willing to do those. And they have to see in you the example that you're asking them to do. And unless you're willing to do that, it's probably not going to work. There's other traits that I see in great leaders, like humility. Many people think that you have to be this iron fist, hardcore leader that, your way is the highway. I believe that that humility is one of the most important traits of a great leader.
Absolutely. It's kind of interesting. What you mentioned is also another thing we've talked about in class, the difference between being a manager and being a leader. Essentially, a manager is a position that you're given, and leadership, being a leader, is a position that's given to you by the people because they trust you and they want to follow you.
Of course.
So that's excellent stuff. Kind of one of the last things I want to ask you about is, just as we wrap up, any advice for the young leader as far as, you graduate college, like you said, with this conceptual knowledge base of ideas and theories, and you get into the workplace. Do you have any advice for young leaders coming up from your experience, or anything you want to pass along?
Sure. I would say, don't be afraid of leading people. You have to have courage to do this. I would also say, get around great leaders that you respect, and that they've proven themselves as leaders, so you can start to capture some of the traits that they have and take those and use them as your own.
Gotcha.
I would also suggest that if you're going into whatever field, whatever organization you're going into, it could be anything, anything where you're leading people, I would suggest that you are willing to move around and get different perspectives, being led by different people, okay? Because every leader is different. Every leader does things a little bit differently, and being able to work in those environments and see from the subordinate side what it's like to work for either a very good leader or a very poor leader, you can determine what area you want to round out your leadership skills in.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Outstanding information, knowledge. Once again, Mark Rolls, Vice President of Commercial Development here at Magellan. And thanks again.
My pleasure.